Before everything changed, Ayanda lived a life shaped by reason, ritual, and skepticism. Raised in a Christian household in Cape Town, South Africa, she respected her family's faith, but didn't feel it. Church was tradition, not truth. To her, God was a concept, useful for some, but distant and silent. She was a practical woman, engaged to Thabo, climbing her way through the corporate world, surrounded by a close-knit family that valued discipline, culture, and quiet dignity. She avoided anything too emotional, too spiritual, or too uncertain. Life had its routines, and Ayanda liked it that way. But under the surface, she often felt empty. Nights brought a quiet unease, and sometimes she found herself questioning everything: purpose, existence, eternity. Still, she pushed those thoughts away, until the day everything stopped. The day her heart stopped. What happened next would shatter her understanding of reality. Ayanda died, and in that moment, she met Jesus. What he showed her shook her to the core. 4 events coming in 2025 that the world isn't ready for. This is the story of a woman who died, saw eternity, and came back forever changed. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. My name is Ayanda, and I should not be alive. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was driving home from work, frustrated after yet another exhausting meeting. The sun was setting behind Table Mountain, and I remember how the sky looked, burning orange, like it was trying to tell me something. I wasn't paying attention. I was too busy scrolling through voice notes at a red light, half listening to Thabo complain about something. And then, impact. I didn't even see the other car, just the sound of shattering glass and my body jerking forward. Then nothing, no pain. Just quiet. I left my body before I knew I was dead. One moment I was in my car, and the next I was above it, watching first responders trying to open the door, their voices muffled, like I was underwater. I didn't feel panic, just a strange pull, like someone was calling me. That's when everything changed. I was suddenly in a place I can't fully describe. It wasn't like Earth. There was light, but it wasn't sunlight. It came from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The peace, it wasn't like relaxation, it was alive. And then in the middle of this unearthly presence, I saw him, Jesus. Not a dream, not an idea, him. He didn't speak at first. He looked at me, and I felt everything in me melt. It wasn't fear. It was the deepest, purest love I've ever known. My soul felt seen. All my pride, my doubts, the secret bitterness I carried toward God, all of it came undone in his gaze. When he finally spoke, his voice was both thunder and whisper. Ayanda, he said, you are not done. Then he showed me. It was like being taken through time, but not time as we know it. I saw 4 events coming, all unfolding in 2025. I'll share them later because they're still unfolding inside me like waves. But I need you to know that what I saw was real. This wasn't a hallucination or a metaphor. It was warning. It was mercy. The first vision brought me to my knees. It was a global shaking, something that stripped people of false security. I could see fear in the eyes of nations, but I could also see people waking up, spiritually, like they were finally listening. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a hospital bed, tubes, machines, my mother sobbing at my side, and the first thing I whispered was, I saw him. But that's when the real struggle began. You see, it's one thing to see Jesus in eternity. It's another to come back and try to explain that to people who think you're just a girl who bumped her head. And it's even harder when you don't yet know how to explain it to yourself. The first few days after I came back were a blur. I drifted in and out of consciousness in the ICU, my body broken but alive. But inside, I was undone. I wasn't the same Ayanda who had climbed the corporate ladder and quietly rolled her eyes during Sunday sermons. I had died. I had met Jesus. And now I was expected to just recover and go back to normal. I couldn't. At first, I didn't tell anyone the full truth. I only told Mama Namsa that I remembered seeing light. She cried and said it was God's grace, but I could tell she thought I meant it in a poetic way. Even when I whispered, "No, Mama, I saw him," she just nodded like I was delirious. I tried to explain it to Thabo, my fiancé. We'd been together for 5 years. He knew me better than anyone, or at least he used to. When I told him, he just stared at me. "Ayanda," he said carefully, "you almost died. Your brain just filled in the blanks." "No," I told him, "I left my body. I saw things. Jesus showed me what's coming." His expression changed, concerned, defensive. "You were never that religious," he said. "Why would God pick you to show something like that?" That hit deep. And honestly, I'd asked myself the same thing. Why me? I wasn't holy. I hadn't read the Bible in years. I didn't pray unless it was to ask for something. But Jesus came to me anyway. Not because I was righteous, but because he's merciful. Still, the doubt from the people I loved began to eat at me. Was I crazy? Had I imagined it all in the chaos of trauma? Was it just a near-death hallucination? But no, there were moments in that place with Jesus that burned into my spirit beyond memory. I could still hear his voice in my sleep. I could still see glimpses of what he showed me. And each time I tried to live like none of it happened, I felt a weight inside, like I was lying to myself and to him. I started having vivid dreams. Not just dreams, visitations. In one, I stood on a hill overlooking a burning city, and I heard the same voice. Warn them. But how do you warn people when you're not even sure how to speak the language of heaven yet? I didn't have the words. I only had the ache. My family noticed. Uncle Becky pulled me aside during a family gathering. He looked at me the way elders do when they sense something wrong in your spirit. "You've changed, Ayanda," he said. "Be careful. Not every light comes from God." That crushed me, because I knew who I saw. But suddenly, I was between two worlds. One that told me to forget and move on, and another that kept pulling me deeper into truth. It started about 3 weeks after I was discharged from the hospital. I was still walking with a cane, still tender from surgeries, but spiritually, something was stirring inside me that I couldn't ignore. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, gasping for air, not from fear, but from urgency, like something was pressing on my soul. Then one night, I had a dream. No, a vision. I was standing in a vast, empty room made of mirrors. Every wall reflected a different version of me. Some I didn't recognize at all. In one reflection, I was angry, yelling at God. In another, I was cold, dressed in business clothes, stepping over people in need. In another, I was crying, holding a Bible close to my chest. But one reflection stood still, calm. She looked straight at me. Her eyes glowed like they held something divine. And then the mirror shattered, and a voice, his voice, spoke again. 4 things are coming, not because I desire destruction, but because my people must choose. I shot up in bed, breathing hard. My hands were shaking. I wrote everything down in my journal, including the phrase that repeated over and over in my mind: "Judgment begins in the house of God." That was the first revelation. Jesus wasn't just showing me events coming for the world. He was showing me things coming for the church, for us. This wasn't just about governments or natural disasters. It was about hearts. That morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Pastor Ruben. He baptized me when I was 12, but we hadn't spoken in a long time. I told him I needed to talk, that something had happened. He agreed to meet the next day. When I arrived, he listened quietly as I told him everything, from the car crash to Jesus, to the mirrors and the message. I expected him to be skeptical. Instead, he looked at me with a strange seriousness. "You're not the only one," he said. 3 people from different parts of the city have come to me this month with dreams, all of them pointing to a shaking, a sifting. I felt like the ground dropped beneath me. This wasn't just me. Something bigger was happening. That was when he pulled out a worn Bible and read from 1 Peter 4:17. "For the time has come that judgment must begin at the house of God." Exactly what I'd heard. I left his office trembling. This wasn't just a personal experience anymore. It was a call, a responsibility. Jesus hadn't shown me those 4 events just to impress me with prophecy. He was sending a warning, for preparation, for repentance, for return. And that terrified me, because now I had no excuse. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had to choose whether I would risk everything to speak the truth, my reputation, my relationships, even my engagement. Because once you've seen eternity, you realize silence is disobedience. After my meeting with Pastor Ruben, I knew I couldn't pretend anymore. I started journaling every detail of my experience, Jesus' face, the words he spoke, the visions he showed me, and I began praying, not just out of duty, but because I needed to. His presence had stirred something in me. I wanted to stay close to him. But the closer I moved to him, the further I felt from the people in my life. I first opened up to Nandi, my best friend since high school. We'd always been able to talk about everything: work drama, relationships, politics, but spirituality had never been our thing. I trusted her though, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd understand. We met for coffee. I told her everything, voice trembling, hands wrapped around my mug like it was the only thing anchoring me. She listened, head tilted, nodding occasionally. But when I mentioned that I believed the church would be the first to face judgment, she blinked slowly and said, "Ayanda, are you sure this isn't trauma? You were in a serious accident. Maybe your mind's just trying to cope." I laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because it hurt. "I know what I saw, Nandi. Jesus was there. I felt him. He showed me things coming in 2025. That's when she leaned back and folded her arms. "Okay, but let's say you did see something. Why would Jesus come to you with that? Why not a pastor or prophet or someone who's been walking with God longer?" That question haunted me. It made me feel unworthy, foolish even. But deep down, I also knew the answer. Because grace doesn't choose the qualified, it qualifies the chosen. When I told Thabo that I wanted to postpone the wedding, he didn't take it well. "Postpone?" he said, nearly dropping his fork. "Because of a dream?" "No," I said calmly. "Because my life is different now. I need time to process it, to understand what God is asking of me." "What about what we planned? What about us?" he asked, his voice rising. "I still love you," I said, "but I have to obey what I know is real. I died, Thabo, and I didn't come back for nothing." He shook his head. "You're not the same woman I proposed to." He was right. I wasn't. And that truth split me in two. Even my own mother, sweet Mama Namsa, started tiptoeing around me. She'd pray over me quietly when she thought I was asleep, whispering things like, "Lord, bring her back." Back to what? To comfort? To pretending? But Pastor Reuben stood by me. He invited me to prayer meetings, where others who had seen and heard things shared their own stories. For the first time since the accident, I didn't feel alone. Still, the weight of loneliness followed me home, the ache of being misunderstood, the sting of rejection. But I kept thinking, Jesus was misunderstood too. So if this path meant losing everything but finding him, wasn't it still gain? The weeks after postponing my wedding were the hardest I'd ever lived. I had chosen truth over comfort, but truth comes with a cost. Thabo stopped answering my texts. Nandi and I drifted. And even inside my family home, the silence was beginning to speak louder than words. One evening I walked into the kitchen and found Mama Namsa and Uncle Becky in the middle of a tense conversation. They went quiet when they saw me. I knew they'd been talking about me. "Is there something you'd like to say to me?" I asked. Mama looked down. Uncle Becky didn't flinch. "You're being deceived, Ayanda," he said firmly. "Visions, judgment, Jesus speaking to you. This is not how God works. And if it is, it's because you opened doors that should have stayed shut." I stared at him. "I didn't go looking for Jesus, Uncle. He came for me." He shook his head. "We have elders, tradition, the Bible. You don't just decide you're a prophet because you had a dream." "I didn't say I was a prophet," I whispered. "I'm just trying to be obedient." That word, obedient, felt like a knife to him. And I realized then, sometimes obedience looks like rebellion to the ones who never saw what you saw. But the external pressures were nothing compared to what was happening inside me. I had started waking up at 3 a.m. every night. Not from nightmares, something would literally call me awake, a presence, a nudge. I began using that time to pray, to read the Word, to ask God to clarify the visions He'd given me. That's when I began to feel a second wave coming. Not a vision like before, but a weight, an urgency. I couldn't explain it. It sat on my chest like a countdown had started, and time was thinning. And then something strange happened. A woman showed up at Pastor Reuben's prayer meeting. Her name was Miriam. She was quiet, maybe in her 50s, with a calmness that felt anchored. After we all prayed, she walked straight up to me and said, "The Lord told me someone here has seen things coming. I think it's you." I froze. I hadn't spoken a word about my visions that day. We sat down, and I told her everything, her eyes filled with tears. "I've seen parts of it too," she said. "The shaking, the fire, but also the remnant, a people who won't bow." I felt the air shift between us. For the first time since I came back, I felt like I wasn't carrying this alone. That night I realized, the deeper I went into this calling, the more divided my life became. Family on one side, old friends on another, and now, strangers who felt like spiritual kin. Lines were forming. fault lines, and I had to make peace with the fact that not everyone could follow where I was going. Every time I tried to live normally, something in me recoiled. I'd sit at the dinner table with Mama and Zola, laughing at old jokes, eating pap and stew, and for a moment, everything felt familiar, safe. But then I'd look into their eyes and see it, the unspoken fear, the doubt, the quiet wondering, is Ayanda still with us, or has she gone too far? And I couldn't blame them. I wasn't who I used to be. I was caught between two worlds, one foot in the living and one in the unseen. One night, Zola came into my room. He rarely did that unless something was wrong. He sat at the edge of my bed, fidgeting with his phone. Finally, he looked up and said, "Are you okay, sis? Like really okay?" Gently. I smiled. "I'm different, Zola, not broken." He nodded, lips pressed tight. I miss you. I miss how things were before. You used to laugh more." His words sank like stones. He wasn't accusing me, he was grieving the version of me he used to know. I took his hand and said, "I miss her too, but this is who I am now. I've seen something I can't unsee." And then I asked him something I'd never dared ask before. "Do you believe in Jesus?" He hesitated. "I don't know. I believe in something, but I'm not sure what." I nodded. "That's okay. Just promise me you'll ask him to show himself to you. Just ask." He didn't answer, but he didn't walk away either. That night I cried harder than I had since the hospital, not because I was afraid, but because this journey was costing me pieces of the people I loved. Not all at once, but slowly, painfully. And then came the text from Thabo. "I don't think we're meant to be anymore. You're not the same woman I fell in love with. I don't understand what's happening to you, and honestly, I'm tired of trying. I hope you find peace, Ayanda. I really do. Goodbye." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. I didn't reply. I just sat there, phone still in my lap, heart aching, not for the relationship, but for the confirmation that this path was narrowing, that people were peeling away, that following Jesus wasn't just about eternal life, it was about death too. Death of comfort, death of image, death of approval. But in the silence that followed, I felt him again. Not in thunder, not in visions, just a whisper, "I am with you, I will never leave you." And in that moment, I knew I wasn't going backwards. I couldn't, even if it meant walking alone. Because in the quiet spaces where people left, Jesus stayed. It was around this time that the visions returned, not while I was sleeping, but in the spaces between moments. I'd be washing dishes, walking to the shop, or folding laundry, and something would shift in the air. I'd blink, and suddenly I'd see. It started small, flashes. A city skyline under storm clouds, a church building with its lights out. Then one day I saw flames, not ordinary fire. This was spiritual. It had no smoke, but it burned everything impure. I could see people running from it, not because it harmed them, but because it exposed them. And I heard him again. "I am coming to purify, not to destroy, but to cleanse my house." The moment ended in a blink, but my heart raced for hours. These weren't just warnings, they were instructions, and they were getting louder. The next morning, I met with Pastor Reuben and Miriam. We sat in the back room of the church, where old wooden pews and faded hymnals held decades of quiet prayers. I told them everything. Miriam's expression didn't change. She simply reached into her bag and handed me a notebook. "I saw the fire last night too," she said. "It's the third time." Pastor Reuben looked between us, his voice low and steady. "The Spirit is moving, and it's not just here in Cape Town. I've spoken to pastors in Kenya, Brazil, even Norway. Similar dreams, similar warnings." That chilled me. It was all connected, global, divine. But what shook me most wasn't the size of the movement. It was the next thing I saw. It came on a Sunday during worship. I wasn't even singing. I was just standing there quietly asking God what he wanted from me next. Suddenly I saw a calendar floating in the air, its pages flipping fast. January, February, March. It stopped on July 2025 and the page began to bleed ink. Words formed, but I couldn't read them, except one: collapse. The vision snapped away, and I almost fell over. My knees buckled, and Miriam caught me. That word haunted me. I didn't know what would collapse: an economy, a nation, the church. But it was coming, and it was closer than anyone was ready for. From that day forward, I felt time compressing, like a spiritual countdown had begun. I couldn't watch TV or scroll social media the same way. Everything felt shallow, urgent, false, like people were sleepwalking into fire. I tried to share with others at church. Some nodded, others smiled politely, but I could feel the wall behind their eyes. The weight of what I carried was too much for most people. Even some believers didn't want to hear it. But the visions wouldn't stop, and deep down I knew they weren't for me to hoard. I had to speak, I had to warn, because ready or not, something is coming, and the fire doesn't wait for permission. I didn't intend to become a voice. I wasn't trying to start anything. But when you carry a message this heavy, it leaks out, even when you try to keep it quiet. One day I was sitting at a cafe reading my Bible quietly. The verse that stood out was Joel 2:1. Blow the trumpet in Zion, sound the alarm on my holy mountain. As I underlined it, the waitress refilling my tea paused. She glanced at my Bible and said, "Is that the end times verse?" I looked up, surprised. "You know it?" She nodded slowly. "My grandmother used to preach it over me when I was little. I don't know why, I just remembered that." We talked for 20 minutes. Her name was Nalidi. She was 22, bright and skeptical, but curious. When I told her my story, her eyes welled up. "I've been having dreams too," she whispered, "but I thought I was crazy." She asked if we could meet again. That was the first ripple. Soon, Miriam and I started meeting every Thursday with 3 others, people who had seen things, heard whispers, felt shifts. Some were quiet, unsure of what they were experiencing. Others were bold, quoting scripture like fire. We weren't a church. We weren't trying to start a movement. We were just trying to obey. And still, the cost grew. At work, my manager pulled me aside. "Ayanda," she said, "you've been distracted, quiet, and you've been bringing your Bible to your desk. We value faith, but please remember this is a professional environment." I nodded, but inside I felt the pressure rising. I was slowly becoming an outsider in every space I used to blend into. Even Zola was changing. One night, he knocked on my door, pacing nervously. "I had a dream," he said. "There was a storm coming, and I was on a boat, but the water was rising inside the boat, and you were there, throwing buckets out." He sat down heavily. "What does it mean?" I took his hand. "It means we don't have time. We need to prepare, spiritually." He didn't argue this time. Later that week, he asked to come with me to a prayer meeting. That was the second ripple. But not all the reactions were hopeful. Nandi sent me a message out of the blue. "I love you, but this is too much. I feel like I'm losing you to some obsession. I hope you come back to us one day." It hurt. But I no longer begged people to understand. Some relationships were meant to stretch. Others were meant to break. And the more I walked this path, the clearer the line became between those who wanted truth and those who feared it. The meetings grew. People came from across Cape Town. Teachers, moms, university students, even a retired pastor who'd had a heart attack and said he'd seen the edge of something terrifying and beautiful. We didn't advertise, we didn't post online, but the Spirit drew them. And slowly it became clear, this wasn't just my burden anymore. What Jesus showed me wasn't just for me. It was a call to all of us to wake up, prepare, and warn others before July 2025 arrived, because something was coming, and it had already begun. By March 2025, the atmosphere felt different, not just spiritually, but in the world. People were restless, prices were rising, protests were starting. There were floods in Mozambique, strange lights in the sky over Eastern Europe, and a pastor in the US had gone viral for claiming he'd seen the same month and word I had, collapse, July 2025. I watched the video twice. He described a vision of a calendar soaked in blood and ink, of churches locking their doors, of people screaming not from pain, but from confusion. It was almost identical to what I had seen weeks earlier. It felt like confirmation, but also a countdown. At the same time, things in my life reached a boiling point. I was called into a meeting at work, HR and my department lead. They were polite but sharp. "We've noticed a change in your focus, Ayanda," they said. "There have been complaints. Some of your coworkers feel uncomfortable with the conversations you've been having about prophecy and judgment." I opened my mouth to respond, but they cut in. "We're asking you to either scale back the religious talk or consider a different role." They offered me a quiet demotion, wrapped in corporate language, but I knew what it really was. That same week, a man approached me after one of our gatherings. His name was Benjamin. He ran a small Christian radio program in Johannesburg and had heard whispers about the girl in Cape Town who saw the fire. I think the message you carry needs to go further, he said. Would you come on and share it? I felt the weight of the moment. On one side, a safe job, a quiet life, and the fragile approval of the people around me. On the other, exposure, criticism, risk, and obedience. I told him I'd pray about it, but deep down, I already knew what I had to do. That night, I walked alone to Signal Hill. I sat looking out over the city, its lights flickering, the ocean stretching beyond the edge. I prayed like I hadn't prayed before. Lord, I whispered, if I say yes, there's no going back. I could lose everything left. But I know what you showed me. I know what's coming, and I know what you asked me to do. Then I heard him. Lose the world if you must, just don't lose me. I broke. Tears soaked my shirt. It wasn't just about a radio show or a job. It was about identity, about legacy, about who I served, my comfort or my king. The next day I quit my job. 2 days later I called Benjamin and said yes. The following week I shared my testimony on air for the first time. I spoke of Jesus, the judgment, the fire, and the calendar. I told them about the urgency, about the cleansing, about the 4 events, and something shifted. Hundreds messaged in, some mocked, others wept, and a few said, I saw it too. That was the choice, that was the fork, and now there was no turning back. I had chosen the narrow road, and it was only just beginning. After the radio testimony aired, everything escalated. My phone lit up for days, calls, messages, invitations, accusations. Some called me anointed, others said I was dangerous. A few whispered that I was deceived by familiar spirits. I wasn't surprised by the pushback. Jesus had warned me this would happen. But what I didn't expect was the pressure from within the church. A pastor I had admired since childhood, Pastor Solomon from a large ministry across town, called me personally. He was kind but firm. You have a gift, Ayanda, he said, but you must be careful not to spread fear. People are fragile. You keep talking about judgment and collapse. What about grace? What about hope? I speak what I've been shown, I replied. Jesus didn't show me these things to keep me quiet. He sighed. Just remember, not every vision is meant for public ears. Be wise. It felt like a warning cloaked in concern. I thanked him, but my spirit stirred with unease. That night I prayed again. Lord, if I'm in error, show me. If I'm not, strengthen me. And then came the email that changed everything. A Christian media outlet from the UK invited me to speak on a live stream, global audience, huge reach. They wanted me to share the 4 events coming in 2025. My stomach dropped reading it. This was the platform I never asked for. I wrestled for days. Accepting would mean exposure on a whole new level. Criticism, scrutiny, maybe even spiritual warfare I wasn't prepared for. But declining would be disobedience. Then came the final confrontation, this time from Mama. She sat me down, holding a folded newspaper in her lap. I didn't recognize the headline until she turned it to me. Local woman claims visions of end times, faith or fanaticism. There was my name. A blurred photo of me at a prayer meeting. Someone had sent it in anonymously. Mama's hands were shaking. Baby, she said, voice cracking, I'm scared. They're laughing at you. They're calling our family unstable. Uncle Becky says you've brought shame to our name. I felt the old wound tear open. That craving to make her proud, to make the family proud, to be the daughter who succeeded, not the one who saw angels and fire. But then I looked her in the eyes and said, Mama, I love you, but I love Jesus more. I saw him, and I will not deny what he showed me. She didn't answer. She just wiped her tears and left the room. I cried until I had no voice. Then I accepted the live stream invitation. The night before I went on air, I fasted and prayed. At midnight, I felt a dark presence enter my room. Fear pressed down on me like a weight. My breath caught in my throat. My hands went cold, and then light. A soft, golden warmth filled the room. I didn't see Jesus, but I felt him. Speak, I am with you. The fear lifted. The next day, I told the world what I had seen. The shaking in the church, the economic unraveling, the spiritual hunger rising in the young, and the global event in July 2025 that would force people to choose between fear and faith. I spoke with trembling, but I did not hold back. And when the live stream ended, I realized something profound. I hadn't just sacrificed my reputation. I had laid my life on the altar, and it was the most peaceful I'd ever felt. The days after the live stream were a blur. My words had traveled farther than I could have imagined. Emails came from Nigeria, Brazil, London, and even Iran. Some shared dreams of their own. Others begged for guidance. A few just wrote, "I believe you." But with the wave of support came the tide of backlash. A South African news anchor called me an internet prophet with a persecution complex. A prominent Christian influencer accused me of using fear to build a platform. And someone sent me a death threat that read, "If you don't stop, we'll silence you." For the first time, I felt the danger physically. I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house made me jump. I stopped going out alone, and part of me asked, was this really worth it? Then came the flood. Cape Town had its worst rainfall in 40 years. Streets overflowed, people were displaced, homes lost. It wasn't the event I saw for July, but it was close enough that panic began to spread. Suddenly, more people wanted to hear what I had to say, not out of curiosity, but out of fear. One night during the storm, I got a message from Zola. "Sis, our neighbor's house collapsed. The whole family is okay, but they're shaken. I think you need to talk to them." I walked over, boots soaked, rain stinging my cheeks like needles. Inside, the family was huddled together, wrapped in blankets. The mother looked up at me with wide, tired eyes. "Is this it?" she whispered. "What you said would happen?" I knelt beside her, took her hand and said, "No, but it's a sign. It's a mercy, a chance to turn to him now before the shaking grows stronger." She nodded, trembling. We prayed right there on the floor, wet, dirty, and holy. Afterward, I stepped outside. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. In the stillness, I heard him again. Not loud this time, not thunderous, just close. "You've done well, my daughter." I fell to my knees right there in the mud and wept. All the rejection, all the fear, all the confusion. It broke in that moment like a dam. I realized I wasn't carrying this alone. Jesus had walked with me every step. And not just me, others were awakening too. I could feel it. This wasn't my fire anymore. It had jumped from soul to soul, igniting a quiet army of faithful hearts. And then the final vision came. I was standing before a massive tree. Its branches stretched into the clouds, roots dug deep into the earth. But half of it was on fire. The flames didn't consume it. They purified it. As the fire burned, dead branches fell away, revealing fresh green shoots underneath. And then I saw people gathering at the base of the tree, their hands lifted, eyes wide with awe. Some were crying, some kneeling, others clinging to each other. It was the remnant, the ones who endured, the ones who heard, the ones who chose. When I woke, my heart was calm. For the first time in months, I slept like a child. I didn't know what exactly would happen in July 2025. I only knew this: the flood had come, the fire was already burning, and soon the world would have to decide where it would stand, within the flame or outside of it. It happened on July 7th, 2025. I'll never forget that date, not because of headlines, but because of what happened inside me. The day began strangely quiet. No visions, no urgency, just a deep stillness, like the entire atmosphere was waiting. I walked outside just after dawn. The sky looked normal, but the air felt heavier. I stood barefoot in the garden, eyes closed, heart listening. And then I heard it. Not with my ears, but with my spirit. Today, the world will choose. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if it would be loud or invisible. But I knew something eternal was unfolding. As the hours passed, reports started to surface online. Financial systems in several countries had glitched, markets frozen, not crashed, just paused, unresponsive. News anchors around the globe were scrambling for answers, calling it a global sync disruption. Some whispered about cyber attacks, others suggested atmospheric interference, but none of the experts knew what to say. And yet, those of us who had seen knew. This was the threshold. Around midday, Pastor Ruben called a spontaneous prayer gathering. Within an hour, over 200 people had gathered in the sanctuary, some from our group, others from the city, even strangers who'd heard about the girl who saw the 4 events. As I stood at the front, the microphone in my hand trembled. I didn't prepare a sermon. I didn't recite scripture. I just spoke the truth. "This is not the end of the world," I said, "but it is the end of pretending. God is calling his people out of compromise, out of comfort, out of hiding." People cried. Others stood in silence. I shared what Jesus showed me: the shaking, the fire, the hunger, the collapse, not of the earth, but of everything false. This was mercy, a divine pause, a chance to choose. Then the lights cut out, not just in the church, across the city. For 7 minutes, all power stopped. Phones, radios, streetlights, everything. Cape Town fell into silence. Some screamed, others knelt. I closed my eyes, and in that moment I saw him again, not in fire or vision, but in the deepest part of me. His presence filled the room like warm wind, and I heard his voice. I am separating, I am calling, I am preparing my bride. When the lights returned, something had shifted. It wasn't dramatic, but it was final. People stayed long after. They didn't want to leave. Some fell to the floor, weeping. Others hugged strangers. One man whispered through tears, "I didn't believe you, but now I see." That night, I went home and sat in the dark, lit only by a candle. I wasn't afraid. The world had tilted, yes. Systems had cracked. But beneath all that, something sacred was being born. People were turning, repenting, searching, choosing. And for the first time since my death, I understood the full weight of what Jesus showed me. This was never about punishment. It was about purification, about preparing the church, not for hiding, but for shining. The fire wasn't coming to destroy us. It was coming to make us ready. It's strange how everything can change, and yet the world still turns like nothing happened. The next morning, people returned to work. Markets restarted. The media offered quick explanations. Temporary outages, isolated events, minor system disruptions. But those of us who had eyes to see, we knew better. Something shifted in the spirit. A line had been drawn, not just around the world, but inside every heart. I sat with my Bible open that morning, staring at the same verse that chased me from the beginning. Blow the trumpet in Zion, sound the alarm on my holy mountain. This wasn't just a verse anymore. It was my life. I had blown the trumpet. I had sounded the alarm, not perfectly, not without fear, but in obedience. And that changed me forever. I've lost people I love. Some walked away, some just quietly faded. But I've also gained something deeper, purpose, a clarity I never knew existed, the kind of peace that doesn't depend on what the world thinks or what tomorrow brings. I've learned that real faith doesn't keep you safe, it sets you on fire, and that Jesus, my Savior, my friend, my King, is worth losing everything for. Zola has started reading the Bible, slowly, quietly. But I see the light in his eyes now. Mama hasn't fully come around, but she prays with me now, out loud, not just in whispers. And even Nandi, she sent me a message the other day. I don't know what's happening in the world, but I think you were right. Can we talk? Hearts are softening. The fire is spreading. I don't know what else is coming in 2025. Maybe more shaking, maybe more collapse. But I know this, Jesus is calling his people out of the shadows, out of lukewarm comfort, out of spiritual sleep. He is calling us to wake up, to return, to burn for him again. So if you're watching this, it's not by accident. You were meant to hear this, not to admire my story, but to examine your own. Ask yourself, am I ready? Have I heard his voice? Have I chosen? Because it's not about fear, it's about faith, about standing when the world bows, about building your house on the rock while everything else shakes. This is the hour. This is the invitation. Jesus is not just coming someday. He's here now, moving, speaking, cleansing, calling. Let him find you ready. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If this message stirred something in you, don't just scroll past it, respond. Drop a comment below. Share your story. Let others know they're not alone. And if you haven't already, subscribe, like the video, and share it with someone who needs to hear what's coming, because the fire is real. And the time is now.